In the merciless heart of the frontier, Maeve faced a deadly choice: to save a nearly broken Apache scout, or protect the fragile safety she'd carved from a world that never understood her. The night air pressed heavy against the land's harsh breath, and every shadow seemed to whisper of threats veiled by darkness. The barren expanse stretched endless, rugged hills melting into starless skies, where the wind carried dust and old grudges alike. Cracks in parched earth told of drought and despair, a wilderness that demanded resilience and smothered weakness. Here, Maeve lived at the edge of isolation, a curandera whose hands soothed wounds as old as the land, yet whose heart bore scars from a community that viewed her with wary eyes. Tonight, fate had fallen upon her doorstep in the form of a man, Dewan, a scout of the Apache people, bloodied and drained by a recent clash. Every slow breath he drew held the weight of pain. His dark eyes, clouded but fierce, reflecting a history of conflict and cautious silence. Neither spoke the other's tongue fluently. Between them lay a gulf carved by years of fear and prejudice. Yet beneath the tension flickered a fragile ember of shared survival. Maeve's fingers trembled slightly as she peeled back torn cloth, revealing ragged wounds etched with dirt and dried blood. She knew the risks. Harboring an Apache scout meant danger, not just from the unforgiving land, but from those who haunted its borders with rifles and suspicion. Still, compassion outweighed caution. To turn him away was to abandon a soul to certain death. To save him was to challenge the cold. Codes she had learned to live by. The quiet was thick as Maeve worked, her touch gentle but deliberate. Dewan's lips parted in a grimace, pain twisting his features even as his eyes searched hers for trust. In silence, they navigated the fragile bridge between healer and hunted, neither certain where the path might lead. The warmth of the fire flickered across Maeve's weathered face, illuminating resolve and the weight of unspoken fears. Outside, the desert held its breath. Distant noises stirred uneasily. The faint clatter of hooves on hard earth, the rustling of leaves caught in an unnatural stillness. Maeve's heart quickened. The boundary between sanctuary and peril was shifting. Every sound sharpened, carrying the promise of arrival. Patrols, hunters, or worse, shadowed foes whose justice was swift and merciless. She straightened slowly, every muscle alert, senses stretched taut, like the drawn bow of a warrior who knows the price of one false move. The noose of the night tightened. Preserving this fragile life meant standing against the unknown that crept ever closer. Then, through the heavy silence, came the night's mighty cat's bin. The unmistakable thunder of horses' hooves, cutting through the darkness. Maeve's breath caught, a chill crawling up her spine. Her eyes narrowed toward the distant horizon, where shadows flickered like vultures circling a dying flame. The moment hung suspended between hope and dread, a whisper of fate, testing her every resolve. Before the next step could fall, before the collision of worlds, Maeve steeled herself for what might come. Every sense turned to the gathering storm on the edge of her lonely refuge. Many fellow travelers who follow our legends across these forgotten lands have told us that fate, or the trickster algorithm of YouTube, sometimes tears their subscriptions unseen. Before the next treacherous trail unfolds and a new twist seizes the horizon, take a quick glance below this video and make sure you're still riding with our band, so you won't lose the thread of the tale. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing from this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The night cloaked the land in deeper shadows, and Maeve's breath came in measured rhythm as she moved silently through the thicket, cradling Dawan's weakened form close against the cold. Every snap of twigs underfoot sent shivers crawling along her skin. This hidden path to her humble shelter was a fragile lifeline, threading between the jaws of danger. Inside the shack, the faint gleam of firelight flickered against rough-hewn walls. Maeve settled Dawan gently onto a bed of worn blankets, her hands trembling slightly as she peeled back the tattered cloth binding his chest wound. His breaths were shallow now, each one a fragile victory against the tide of pain and exhaustion threatening to claim him. Their eyes met, hers steady, desperate to imbue hope, his clouded with doubt, bristling with the ingrained caution of a hunted man. Between them, silence filled the space, heavier than the desert dusk. Words, when spoken, had always seemed inadequate, but here, intent spoke louder, her touch careful and persistent, his guarded acceptance. The hours crept by, marked only by the soft rasp of wind against the wooden walls and occasional shifts in his labored breathing. Outside, distant murmurs of rumors began to stir. Whispers carried by the sharp desert breeze spoke of a missing scout, unsettling echoes that wove through both tribal camps and the nearby settler homesteads. Maeve's mind raced as the walls seemed to close tighter with secrecy and peril. If news of Dawan's presence here spread, it could seal their fates alike, dead by the bullets of suspicion or hunted down by relentless pursuers. She worked with careful calm, grinding herbs into a paste, pressing linen soaked in healing salves against his broken flesh. Every gesture bore the weight of defiance against the world that would see them enemies. Dawan's gaze lingered on her hands, delicate but resolute, the touch of a curandera who cared not for boundaries drawn in blood and fear. As pain etched its mark across his face, a crack of something softer emerged, a flicker of fragile trust struggling through the scars of conflict. Long past midnight, a stillness settled, broken only by the muted sounds of the desert night. The fire's glow warmed the small space, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper promises and threats in equal measure. Maeve finally sat back, exhaustion shadowing her features, but determination burning still. "You must rest," she murmured. The words fell unevenly, bridging the gulf of languages between them, yet carrying an undeniable sincerity. Dawan closed his eyes, as if surrendering, if just for a moment, to the fragile sanctuary she offered. Outside, under a sky littered with cold stars, the world shifted silently. The news of a fallen scout was no longer whispered tones, but a spreading flame on the winds, a spark igniting fear on both sides of a fractured land. Hunts would begin, allies would not hesitate, and the border between friend and foe grew perilously thin. With the first hint of gray seeping beyond the rugged hills, a sudden knock shattered the fragile tranquility. Maeve rose, hand instinctively resting near the knife at her hip as she moved toward the door. The chill morning air pressed against her, heavy with unsaid danger. Beyond the threshold stood a figure, veiled in the dust and weariness of the trail. A messenger from the Apache tribe. His eyes, sharp and unsettled, met hers with a cautious intensity. In his hand, a simple but weighty offering, plans for parley. Maeve's pulse quickened. The word itself hung in the sparse light like a promise draped in uncertainty. On the cot behind her, Dawan's eyes flicked open, clouded by pain, but now, sharp with apprehension. The messenger spoke, his voice low but firm, a summons to dialogue, an unexpected chance to bridge the chasm of centuries. Maeve's breath caught, torn between hope and the dangers it ushered. Outside, the sun's first rays spilt across the barren land, gilding the horizon with fragile gold. The quiet was deceptive, holding 1,000 unspoken threats just beyond the edge of dawn. Within the fragile refuge Maeve guarded, the fate of two worlds balanced precariously on the storm's edge, and as the morning grew warmer, the air thickened with the weight of choice, peace or bloodshed. The messenger's words hung heavy in the room, echoing the chief's vow that was poised to change everything. The dawn broke, and with it a fragile hope stirred in the heart of a solitary woman and the fate-bound scout beside her. The morning air hung heavy with an ancient tension as Maeve stepped outside her humble shelter. The dust swirling at her boots, stirred by footsteps deliberate and measured. Before her stood the Apache chief, a man carved from years of hardship, his weathered face shadowed beneath a worn headband, eyes sharp like obsidian, reflecting loss and wary determination. Beside him, Dawan lingered, limping but resolute, the pain from his wounds softened only by the grim hope ignited within. The messenger's words from dawn still echoed, a call for parley, a chance neither side could easily refuse, though suspicion clawed at their resolve. Maeve met the chief's gaze steadily, sensing the weight of history pressing down on both their peoples. The long, bloodied past stretching like a chasm between them. "You've tended to my son," the chief said, his voice gravelly, touched by the desert wind yet steady. "And for that, I owe you a debt not lightly repaid." His eyes flicked briefly to Dawan, who spoke little but bore the silent strength of one who had seen too much. But words are fragile when tested by steel and gunfire. Maeve's voice was calm, soft, but unwavering. "I chose to heal him, because life, no matter what name we call it, is worth the fight. The land is harsh enough, without us tearing each other apart." A flicker of unspoken pain passed through the chief's expression. "Your people fear us, and my people fear yours. The wounds aren't only on the flesh, but deep in the hearts of those who live at the edge." He gestured around, toward the empty plains and the unseen eyes that might be watching. But perhaps there is a path quieter than the gunshot. Dawan's gaze swung from Maeve to the chief, the wariness barely masking a spark of yearning. Years of conflict simmering beneath his brow, now challenged by the fragile hope beginning to bloom. As they spoke, the brittle stillness of the dawn was broken by distant voices carried on the wind, a murmur of unease spreading from settlements not far off. Maeve's breath caught. The chief lowered his head slightly, feeling the weight of news yet to reach him fully. Suddenly, Darwin's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon as he murmured in a language Maeve could not understand. A warning, sharp and urgent. The chief leaned in, tension knitting his brow. "What do you see, Scout?" "Colonists," Darwin replied in halting English, his voice strained but firm. "A group, angry with talk of peace. They gather beyond the ridge, restless and ready to claim what they believe is theirs by right." Maeve took a step forward, suddenly aware of the fragile lines they were walking. If they strike, it won't just be words broken. It will be blood. The chief's jaw clenched. Years of lost battles and fallen kin flash behind his eyes. We must act before destruction comes. This truce, it cannot unravel. Maeve nodded, resolve hardening like the stones beneath their boots. Then we use what we have, our hands, our words, the land itself, to buy time, to build a shield of trust, however thin. Beneath the tense exchanges, a silent accord began to thread itself, fragile yet undeniable. Hours melted away as they moved together in wary harmony. Maeve showed the chief the crude herbs and concoctions she prepared, a shared language of healing crossing bloodied borders. Dewan led the scouts, sharing knowledge of the terrain, its secret paths and hidden vantage points. The chief commanded with a voice that brooked no disobedience, rallying the younger warriors who eyed Maeve with cautious curiosity. The day wore on beneath a relentless sun, its heat bending the air like the sharp edge of a blade. Whispers of the hostile colonists neared, stirring like a quiet storm in the distance, tension thickening each breath. Plans were drawn, with trembling hands on the worn map Maeve unfolded, a web of defense born from desperation. Despite the shadow of imminent conflict, a strange solidarity began to take root. Dewan laughed softly, a brief, ragged sound, when Maeve pointed out a certain wildflower, known by both peoples to soothe pain. "Even the earth offers its truce," she said, voice lighter for a moment. The chief's harsh visage softened, the smallest flicker of a smile breaking through. But the peace they struggled to weave hung by a thread, as whispers of dissent crept among the elders and amongst the colonists who saw any parley as betrayal. Rumors like sparks in dry grass threatened to ignite the tinder of old hatreds once more. As the sun dipped low, shadows pooling like ink over jagged stone, a figure cloaked in dust and shadow appeared silently at the edge of their gathering. A presence felt more than seen. The chief's hand instinctively reached for his weapon, eyes narrowing as the visitor's gaze met his with a cold calculation. Maeve stepped closer, heart pounding. Was this a spy? An assassin, sent to shatter the fragile hope they fought to kindle? The figure said nothing, only extended a folded note bearing threats and warnings from the hostile colonists, proof that the breach between peace and war was closer than ever, a blade poised to sever their delicate accord. Darwin's knuckles whitened around the haft of his knife. "They watch us," he growled. "They want this truce ended, with fire, not words." Maeve swallowed hard, looking to the chief. The man's eyes burned with fierce determination, tempered by the heavy cost of too many lost battles. "We must be ready," the chief declared, voice steady with the authority of a lifetime bearing scars and burdens in equal measure. "This is no longer a game of words, but of survival. We bind our fates together now, or perish divided." Maeve's gaze flickered to the horizon where the first stars blinked awake. A storm was gathering, unseen but deeply felt. Dewan placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "The attack will come soon," he whispered. "We need to trust and act before dawn breaks again." The dusk deepened, swallowing the land in velvet shadows. The fragile hope, born of compassion and courage, was now tempered by a rising tide of fear and urgency. A night loomed ahead, filled with uncertain alliances and the first tremors of battle waiting to break. And in the heart of that night, the chief's vow would kindle a fire that might just change their fate forever. The late afternoon sun bled low into the sky, casting long shadows over the fragile camp that teetered on the edge of an uneasy alliance. Maeve wiped the sweat from her brow, each bead a silent testament to the day's weight pressing down upon her shoulders. Around her, young warriors moved with grim purpose, their eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows. They listened closely as she spoke, her voice steady but urgent, a thread weaving a fragile hope through the gathering storm. Dewan crouched close by, tracing the rough outline of the camp's perimeter with practiced eyes. His scars ached with each movement. Yet there was fierce light behind his gaze, the kind only those who have survived find in the depths of hardship. He pointed to a jagged ridge outside their circle, a place where hostile colonists might gather unseen, their murmurs carried faintly by the wind. "We cannot wait for war to find us," he muttered, his voice hoarse but sharp. "We must prepare what little we have." Maeve swallowed the fear that threatened to rise in her throat. She glanced at the Apache chief, who stood apart, his broad frame silhouetted against the darkening hills. The man's eyes had not lost their edge, but beneath the harsh lines and years of loss, a slow-burning determination pulsed. He nodded to her, acknowledging the burden they shared. Together, their small group set to work, fashioning crude barriers from fallen branches and thorned brush. Maeve's hands, usually so skilled in gentle healing, now gripped rough twine and sharpened stakes, each strike an act of defiance against the gathering darkness. The young warriors followed Dewan's silent commands, moving with a fierce precision born of survival and necessity. Evening air thickened with tension, every rustle of leaves or distant howl sharpening the collective senses. As dusk slipped toward night, a figure appeared at the camp's edge, cloaked and silent, stepping through the shadows like a wraith. Instinctively, the chief's hand moved toward his rifle, eyes narrowing, reading the tension in the stranger's gait. Maeve's heart hammered fiercely, sensing the weight of silence more than the soft dust kicked up beneath the visitor's boots. The stranger paused, then revealed a folded note, its edges worn and creased. A chill swept through the circle as the chief broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The message was stark, a warning scribbled with cruel intent, threats from hostile colonists determined to shatter any hope of peace. Dewan's grip tightened on his knife, knuckles whitening. His gaze swept the darkening horizon like a hunter sensing the fatal approach of prey. "They watch us," he growled low, "ready to burn the bridges we struggle to build." Maeve met the chief's eyes, searching for the unspoken weight lodged there. He exhaled slowly, the sound carrying years of battles lost and won, of lives sacrificed. "There is no turning back now," the chief said, voice rough but authoritative. "This fragile truce is a shield we must hold with every breath. We bind our fates, forged in pain and hope alike, or we fall divided." A heavy silence settled over the camp. The wind whispered against the makeshift barricades, as if nature itself held its breath in quiet accord. Maeve felt the sharp edge of fear slicing through the fragile peace they had fought tirelessly to create. But beneath the fear burned an ember of resolve. Night deepened, swallowing the last hues of twilight beneath its velvet cloak. Within the camp, the mingled scent of earth, sweat, and wild sage anchored them to the land they fought to protect. Words gave way to actions as the group settled into wary vigilance, the crackling fire's glow casting flickering shadows across etched faces. Maeve's thoughts raced back to Dawan, the scout wounded and saved, whose presence now symbolized a fragile bridge between divided worlds. His breath was steady beside her as they moved through the camp, sharing silent glances that spoke of unspoken promises and shared burdens. Hours crawled forward on cat's paws, the night thick with anticipation. Then, her gaze caught signs of movement beyond the perimeter. Subtle disturbances, footprints fresh in scattered dust, and the faint murmur of voices, rough and urgent, carried just ahead of the wind. The hostile colonists were close, closer than they dared hope to prepare for. Her hand instinctively reached for the satchel of dried herbs hanging at her side, fingers brushing the worn leather as if grasping a talisman. Dawan's voice came as a whisper in the dark. "They come at dawn. We must trust each other now, or lose everything to fire and blood." Maeve nodded, the weight of those words settling like lead in her chest. The camp tightened, the fragile alliance held fast beneath the implacable night sky. The chief's vow hung in the tensioned air, a solemn into place. Her fingers, nimble despite their usual tenderness, wove crude barriers, each lash of twine a silent prayer against the gathering storm. The camp around her buzzed with a tense energy. Young warriors sharpening arrows, eyes flickering with shadows of doubt and defiance. Dawan's steady gaze traced the contours of the rugged ridge beyond, where restless shapes whispered of danger unseen. "I can hear them," Dawan muttered, voice low, each word heavy with warning. Colonists stirring beyond the ridge, hungry for a fight they think will cleanse this land. His hand brushed the jagged scar across his forearm, a testament to battles fought both without and within. Maeve's breath caught, the weight of his words pressing cold against her chest. She glanced toward the Apache chief. The man stood silhouetted against the darkening hills, his broad shoulders squared like a wall against the night. His eyes, sharp as flint, met hers briefly, a silent pact sealed between two weary souls. "We must do more than wait," Maeve said, voice laced with quiet urgency. "This isn't just about survival. It's about carving a future where we're not forever enemies." She exhaled, feeling the dry wind scrape her lungs. "Our hands, our words, they're all the shield we have before the guns blaze." At her words, the chief's stoic expression cracked for a breath. Words alone don't stop bullets, but perhaps they plant seeds that can. His gaze shifted across the camp, a ragtag mosaic of hope and desperation. "We defend this fragile hope. We fight, not just with weapons, but with the will to embrace a new dawn." Dewan stepped forward, voice rough as gravel. "Then we prepare where we stand. I'll lead scouts to find blind spots, paths hidden beneath dust and thorn. We bolster the lines Maeve's hands have helped build." The sun sank further, stains of blood red spilled across the clouds. Shadows deepened beneath the brittle trees, fingers reaching out like warning. The camp pulsed with a restless energy, every heartbeat a drum of war, masked by fragile unity. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the twilight, like a ghost stitched from silence and dust. Cloaked, slow, every step deliberate. The chief's hand instinctively fell to the rifle slung at his back. His gaze sharpened, slicing through the obscurity. Maeve's heartbeat thundered in her ears, the night thick with unspoken threats weighing heavy in the air. The stranger paused at the camp's border, then extended a folded note, edges worn, a silent shackle of dread. With careful fingers, the chief broke the dusty seal, unfolding the paper as firelight flickered across the ink. Cruel words scrawled with intent to wound. A brutal warning from the hostile colonists who lurked beyond the fragile peace. Dewan's knuckles whitened around the haft of his knife, his gaze sharpening like a hawk sensing the descent of prey. "They watch our every breath," he growled, voice low and fierce. "They aim to burn the bridges we struggle to build, to drown hope in fire and blood." Maeve searched the chief's face, reading years of wars lost and kin fallen. The man exhaled slowly, the weight of countless battles pressing into the dusk. "No turning back," he declared, voice rough but steady, a low thunder of command. "This fragile truce is our shield. Our fate is bound together by pain and hope. We stand as one, or we fall divided." A heavy silence fell like a mantle over the camp. The wind whispered against the barricades, nature itself holding breath in solemn witness. Maeve felt the keen edge of fear slice through the quiet, but beneath it, a flicker of resolve ignited steady and bright. As dark spilled its velvet across the heavens, the mingled scents of sweat, earth, and wild sage wove into the night's breath. The camp settled into tense vigilance, fires crackling like fragile heartbeats in the shadows. Maeve's thoughts flickered to Dewan, the scout saved from death, now symbol and bridge between two worlds, long at odds. His breath was steady beside her as they silently patrolled the perimeter, eyes sharp and voices hushed. Time moved slow, stretched thin over the brittle hours. Then, Subtle signs whispered their approach. Footprints pressed fresh into displaced dust. Hushed murmurings carried ahead of the wind. The enemy drew close, closer than any dared to admit. Her fingers brushed the worn leather of the satchel slung at her side, fingers tightening like grasping fate itself. Dawan's voice was barely a whisper, harsh with urgency. They come at dawn. We must trust or lose everything to fire and blood. Maeve's nod was fierce, an oath sealed beneath the cold eyes of distant stars. The camp's fragile alliance braced beneath the infinite night. The chief's vow hung heavy like a flame in the darkness, a solemn promise to stand unbroken amid the coming storm. And beneath the shrouded sky, the whispered oath in Maeve's heart burned clear and true. By dawn, everything would change forever. The chief's voice carried. Across the cracked earth, steady but heavy with a gravity born of years, etched into his weathered face. This vow I make, to guard peace between our people, no matter the storm that seeks to tear it down. We bind ourselves to a single purpose, for the blood spilled on this land cries out for nothing less. Maeve watched the silhouettes of the warriors standing firm, their shadows long and tense beneath the merciless sun. Her hands, though worn from healing, now gripped the rough twine, tied around stakes they had set as crude defenses. She felt the weight of hope mingled with fear settle deep in her chest. The chief's vow was more than words. It was a beacon radiating across the scars of past wounds, a fragile promise to hold fast against the gathering tempest. Dawan stood close, his body scarred yet alive with quiet strength. He met the chief's gaze and nodded in solemn recognition. His eyes flicked to Maeve, and in that brief exchange, a silent covenant was forged, one born of survival, pain, and an unexpected courage that neither the town nor the tribe had known they could claim. Around the camp, the air thickened with a mixture of exhaustion and unease. Since the dawn shadows had faded and the harsh light spilled fully across the plain, tensions once buried beneath unspoken truces began to stir visibly. Whispers rose like dry grass underfoot. Young warriors exchanged wary glances. Colonists lurking near their makeshift borders shifted uneasily, and all were acutely aware the peace hung on a knife's edge. Maeve's gaze swept the assembled faces, hopeful, uncertain, and fiercely guarded. Some saw her as an outsider, others as a symbol of something new and fragile. The chief's decision had shaken the old order, stirring dissent among his own people and suspicion within the colonists. Yet it was she who had tended to the broken body of Dawan, who had bridged the silence of centuries with something closer to understanding. The chief stepped forward, his voice low but resolute, carrying weight beyond command. We are bound now by this vow, not just by the ties of our blood, but by the recognition of shared fate. Each act of violence against one of us is an act against both. A ripple ran through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably, the unspoken histories of hatred and loss pressing against their hearts. Yet the chief's presence anchored them, a man forged by pain who now chose to wield hope. Dawan's teeth clenched as he scanned the horizon, the sharp edge of his gaze cutting through the simmering heat. But the enemy does not rest, he muttered, voice tight. There are those who reject this peace. Among the colonists, many still breed fury, refuse to lay down rifles and grudges. They watch from shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. Maeve nodded slowly, feeling each word settle into the dust like a warning. We have only this moment to build a shield of trust. Fragile as it may be, it is the only defense against what seeps from beyond. The camp fell silent, save for the faint whisper of wind carrying voices from the nearby settlements, a sound heavy with portent. Soldiers and militias from outlying forts were rumored to be stirring, gathering strength behind rigid lines of outdated law and fear. Maeve's stomach clenched. News spread quickly in these borderlands. The word was out, authorities mobilized nearby, their orders clear and merciless, to crush those deemed threats, be they native or settler, friend or foe. The chief's hand rested briefly on the hilt of his knife. His eyes burned with a determined fire beneath heavy brows. Their armies march toward our lands. They see all who stand outside their control as enemies to be extinguished. A hush descended, a heavy pause pregnant with dread and resolve. Maeve glanced at Dewan, whose breath came steady but tense. His fingers curled into fists, like the land itself had gripped him, tighter with every passing hour. If they come, he said, voice barely above a whisper, we face a storm that won't care who stood where. Yesterday, the weight of his words echoed within Maeve's ribcage. There was no room for doubt now. The fragile alliance had to hold, not for politics or pride, but for survival itself. Around them, young warriors sharpened their blades with grim resolve. Colonists gathered supplies, their faces hardening as reality bled in. Their fears, old hatreds, and desires for peace wrestled silently beneath the surface. Maeve pressed her palm to a rough-hewn post, grounding herself in the fading light. She inhaled deep, tasting the dry dust on the breeze, mingled with wild sage, the scent of a land she refused to surrender to violence. Across the camp, the chief lifted his voice again, cutting through the restless murmurs like a struck bell. We prepare not just to fight, but to defend what little chance we have to change. The future. We hold the line together. A sudden clamor rose at the periphery. Maeve's eyes snapped to the shadows, where figures moved through the edgelands. Messengers and scouts returned with urgent news. Tension snapped taut like a bowstring. Dewan strode forward, his expression grave. He passed word swiftly. A military patrol, smaller in number, but far more brutal than anticipated, had been spotted advancing toward the border. Their intent clear, to root out and destroy all deemed unwanted. Maeve's heart pounded. The coming battle was no longer distant rumor. It was the inevitable dawn, breaking hard and fast. The chief's jaw tightened. This vow we made will be tested sooner than expected. The fire comes for us all, and we must answer together. Maeve and Dewan exchanged a fleeting glance, the unspoken fears reflected in their eyes. The fragile peace teetered perilously, its survival dependent on courage, trust, and the fierce will to stand united against the storm. By dawn, the first shadows of a far deadlier conflict would stretch across this land, forcing them to confront not only external enemies, but the fractures within their own ranks. The camp held its breath beneath the gathering twilight, waiting for the inevitable. And as the stars blinked to life against the darkening sky, the distant rumble of hooves echoed. A military patrol was mobilizing, closing fast. The fragile alliance would face its greatest trial yet. The sun dipped low beyond the ridge, casting long, trembling shadows over the fragile encampment, where hope and fear intertwined like tangled roots beneath the earth. Maeve's hands, still muddy and raw from weaving thorned branches into crude barricades, trembled slightly. Not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Around her, young Apache warriors moved silently but with purpose, their eyes sharp and watchful, limbs coiled like springs ready to snap. Dewan stood close by, his wounded arm cradled carefully against his body. Yet the fire in his dark eyes burned fiercely. He traced the contours of the horizon with a scout's precision, lips tightening as he spoke in low, measured words. They come like a thunderstorm, gathering over the plains, resolve carved by years of grief and endurance. His broad shoulders were squared against the dying light, eyes like flint probing the uneasy dusk ahead. With a slow nod, the chief acknowledged their shared burden without a word, the silent pact forged in mutual survival. "We cannot wait for them to break the silence with gunfire," Maeve said softly, voice steady, despite the bitterness of despair that sought to seep in. "This camp, this fragile hope we've built, it depends on more than prepared traps and holdfast spears. We need to temper courage with wisdom." The chief's gaze swept across the makeshift defenses, stakes sharpened and thorn branches woven with twine. Simple, but enough to slow the rush of the first wave. His lips pressed into a thin line before he spoke, low and gravel-kissed. "Words won't stop bullets, but they may buy us time. Time to stand taller than the hatred carved into the rocks of this land." Dawan's eyes flickered toward Maeve, then back to the chief. "Then we prepare the blind spots, the trails hidden beneath dust and brush. Let our foes find no easy entry." His tone was fierce, hardened by survival, yet laced with the fragile trust beginning to take root between them. Even as they spoke, the heat of the dying sun burned deeper, staining the sky a bloodshot red. The camp buzzed with silent activity. Warriors moved with grim purpose. Pack animals shifted nervously, and tiny sparks of sweat slid down Maeve's temples. The scent of earth, sage, and sweat hung thick, an undeniable reminder of the life they clung to so fiercely. Out of the deepening twilight emerged a figure cloaked in the dust and shadows of the frontier. The stranger moved with deliberate hush, each step a quiet ripple across the uneasy calm. The chief's hand instinctively found the worn leather of his rifle strap. His eyes narrowed, slicing through the dusk to dissect the visitor's intentions. Maeve's breath caught, heartbeat pounding like a war drum in her ears. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken threats, lurking just beneath the surface. The stranger halted at the camp's border, and slowly extended a folded note, the edges worn and stained by travel. A wave of silence crashed through the gathered group as the chief broke the seal and unfolded the paper, firelight flickering on the cruel scrawl scrawled within. The message bore threats, cold warnings from the hostile colonists surrounding them like vultures eyeing a wounded prey. Its words crackled with the promise of destruction and disdain for the fragile peace they struggled so fiercely to build. Darwin's grip on the haft of his knife tightened, knuckles whitening, the muscles in his jaw twitching with restrained fury. His eyes scanned the horizon like a predator, sensing the storm, ready to break. "They watch every breath we take," he growled, voice low but edged with iron. "Their hope is to burn these bridges to ash, to drown out the light we fight to kindle in blood and fire." Maeve met the chief's gaze, reading the deep wells of pain forged across his hardened features. His exhale came slow and heavy, carrying the accumulated weight of history, the losses, the battles carved into his bones. "There is no turning back," he said at last, voice thick with somber resolve. "This fragile truce is our shield, and their war will test it beyond anything we've known. Our fates are tied, bound by the scars we bear and the hope we choose to hold." A heavy silence settled, the kind that presses down like dust on dry bones. The wind whispered softly against the barricades, a breath held in reverence or dread, none could say which. Beneath the night's velvet cloak, scents of earth, sweat, and wild sage curled and twisted in the cool air. Fires crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits on weathered faces, each marked by old grudges and new hope intertwined. Maeve's thoughts drifted to Dawan, the scout saved by her hands, now a symbol walking the thin line between two worlds steeped in hate and haunted by history. His steady breath was a quiet comfort as they moved silently through the camp, exchanging looks heavy with promises and shared burdens. Miles slipped by, stretched thin beneath watchful eyes and tightened nerves. Then, faint and nearly lost in the dark, came subtle signs. Slight disturbances in dust, fresh footprints slipping across the earth like whispered warnings, and voices carried just ahead of the restless wind, rough, urgent, brimming with hostile intent. They were close, closer than anyone dared admit, yet no one could turn away. Maeve's hand found the satchel slung at her side, fingers tightening around the weathered leather as if clutching fate itself. Dawan's voice came as a jagged whisper, broken by tension. "They come at dawn. We must trust or lose everything too." Fire and blood. Her nod was fierce, an oath carved beneath a cold, indifferent sky, scattered with distant stars. The camp's fragile alliance held fast beneath the infinite night, each breath a vow against the gathering tempest. And in that stillness, beneath the silently witnessing heavens, the chief's vow echoed in Maeve's heart. By dawn, everything would change forever. The sun dipped low beyond the ridge, bathing the camp in a waning, blood-red light. Maeve's fingers were raw and scratched from weaving thorned branches into a precarious barrier, their defense against a storm gathering silently on the horizon. She moved with deliberate care, each lash of twine a whispered prayer for the fragile hope they fought to protect. Around her, young Apache warriors shifted restlessly, their eyes sharp and wary. Every muscle was coiled, ready to snap at the slightest threat. Dewan, still nursing the scarred arm that Maeve had tended so tenderly, stood near the perimeter. His gaze marked the beginning, Maeve said, voice steady even as despair threatened to invade. This camp, this fragile peace we're building, it depends on more than spears and traps. Wisdom must temper courage. The chief surveyed the crude defenses, sharpened stakes twined with brambles, walls woven from thorned branches. His lips pressed into a thin line before he spoke, voice low and gravel-streaked. Bullets don't heed words, but words may buy us time. Time enough to stand taller than the hatred carved into this land. Dawan's dark eyes flicked from Maeve to the chief. Then we must seal the hidden trails, the blind spots beneath dust and brush. The enemy must find no easy passage. His tone was fierce, hardened by survival, and yet laced with the fragile trust creaking between them. The sun sank further, staining the clouds a bruised red. The camp buzzed with quiet urgency. Warriors moved like shadows, purposeful and silent. Pack animals shifted restlessly, nostrils flaring to the scent of fear and wild sage. Sweat slid down Maeve's temples, a salty rivulet, tasting of desperation and determination. From the deepening twilight, a figure emerged, a silent wraith, cloaked in dust and shadow. The chief's hand moved instantly to the worn leather strap of his rifle. His eyes narrowed to thin slits, slicing the darkness for the stranger's intent. Maeve's breath hitched, heart pounding a war drum rhythm. The air thickened, charged with the weight of unspoken threats pressing just beneath the surface. The stranger halted at the camp's edge and slowly extended a folded note, its edges frayed and travel-worn. Silence crashed over the group as the chief broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Firelight flickered across the cruel, hasty scrawl within. The message was a blade. Threats penned with venom, a cold warning from hostile colonists circling like vultures, poised to attack their fragile alliance. Words burned with contempt for the peace they fought to kindle. Dewan's grip clenched the haft of his knife, knuckles stark white. His jaw twitched with restrained fury. His eyes roamed the horizon's black folds like a predator sensing the storm's surge. They watch every breath, he growled, low but iron hard. They aim to burn these bridges to ash, to drown out our light in fire and blood. Maeve met the chief's gaze, reading the worn sadness beneath the fierce exterior, the weight of battles carved deep into flesh and soul. He exhaled slowly, the breath a weary ghost of countless losses. "There is no turning back," he said, voice thick with somber resolve. "Our fragile truce is a shield. Their war will test it beyond anything we have faced. Our fates are bound together, scarred and hopeful." A heavy silence settled like dusk over the camp. The wind sighed against their barricades with breath held, reverent or fearful, no one could say. Beneath the velvet night, earth, sweat, and wild sage mingled in the cool air. Fires flickered, throwing restless shadows that danced like spirits on faces etched by old wounds and new hope alike. Maeve's thoughts drifted to Dewan, the scout she had saved, now standing as living proof that bridge between worlds could exist. His breath was steady beside her as they moved silently through the camp, exchanging looks heavy with unspoken promises and shared burdens. Miles slipped by, stretched thin beneath watchful eyes and taut nerves. Then, faint but undeniable, came subtle signs. Disturbed dust, fresh footprints whispered across the earth, and voices carried just ahead of the restless wind, rough, urgent, cloaked in hostile intent. They were close, closer than any dared admit, yet none could turn away. Maeve's hand closed tight around the worn leather satchel slung at her side, clutching fate like a talisman. Dawan's voice was a sharp whisper cracked by tension. They come at dawn. We must trust now, or lose everything to fire and blood. Maeve's nod was fierce, carved under a cold sky strewn with indifferent stars. The camp's fragile alliance held fast beneath the infinite night, each breath a solemn vow against the gathering tempest. And beneath the silent heavens, the chief's vow echoed in Maeve's heart. By dawn, everything would change forever. The chief's voice rose, steady and resolute against the restless winds that stirred the camp. This vow I make, to guard peace between our people, no matter the storm that seeks to tear it down. We bind ourselves to a single purpose. For the blood spilled on this land cries out for nothing less. Around Maeve, every pair of eyes fixed on the chief, warriors, colonists, and the few who dared stand united in this moment, fragile as morning dew. The harsh sun beat down, yet beneath its unforgiving glare, a new light kindled in the depths of their wearied souls. Maeve's hands, rough and steady from a journey of healing and hardship, tightened around the stakes, tied with thorned branches, the small bulwark of their hope. Dawan, his arm still, bandaged but his spirit unbroken, stepped forward. His gaze locked with the chief's, an acknowledgement passing silently between the two men who had weathered storms seen and unseen. Then a mixture of pain and fierce hope. I tended to Dawan because no life is beyond saving, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of countless struggles faced in silence. If we cannot find peace here, amid these broken lands, then what hope remains for any of us? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces hardened, others softened, as the truth in her words settled like warm rain on dry stone. Dawan scanned the horizon, the sun's harsh light casting long shadows behind him. Still, enemies lurk who will not honor this truce. Among the colonists, fury burns hot. Guns fatten with hatred. They watch from the shadows, waiting for an excuse to set fire to the fragile trust we've built. Maeve's breath caught in her chest. Then, we must act. Not just hold fast, but bind our fates with courage and wisdom alike. The chief nodded slowly, placing a heavy hand upon the rough wood of a nearby post. No more waiting. The armies from the forts approach with orders as cold as winter's heart, to extinguish those who stand beyond their iron laws. They see us all as threats. A hush fell over the camp, thick and suffocating. Maeve glanced at Dawan, whose steady breathing belied the storm gathering behind his eyes. If they come, we will face the fire together, no longer as scattered ashes, but as a single flame. Young warriors sharpened blades with grim determination, their faces etched with memories of loss and dreams of what might yet be. Colonists gathered supplies, silently acknowledging that old rivalries must yield to survival. A sudden clamor at the camp's edge sliced through the tense air. Scouts returned, faces pale under sunburned dirt, bearing grim news. The patrol was closer, their numbers fewer, but cruelty doubled. Their intent was clear and merciless: sweep the borderlands clean of all who defied their will. Maeve felt the weight of it all pressing down. This was no distant battle. It was the dawn of reckoning, and the fragile alliance would be tested beyond all measure. The chief's jaw tightened. Our vow will prove its worth today. We stand not as enemies, but as one body bruised by the scars of old wounds, united by the hope for a better dawn. Silence followed, heavy but resolute. The camp prepared quietly but swiftly. Warriors gathered around Maeve and Dewan, eyes burning with fierce trust. Maeve handed out poultices, smoothing aching muscles and sealing wounds while murmuring words born of old medicine and new hope. Dewan moved from group to group, sharing knowledge of the land and tactics learned in grief and endurance. As the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the sky, the encampment stood ready, not just to fight, but to protect a vision of peace hammered out from history's broken forge. Suddenly, the distant thunder of hooves shattered the fragile calm. The patrol emerged from the shadows, faces grim, led by cold eyes that knew nothing but orders and steel. But standing before them was not a fractured alliance, but a force tempered by trust. Maeve, the healer who dared cross invisible lines; Dewan, the scout scarred but unbowed; and the chief whose vow shook the dust from old grievances. Bullets rang out, echoing through the still air, red dust swirling around the fighters, locked in desperate defense. Yet amidst the clangor, Maeve's heart beat steady, tethered to the promise they forged. When the smoke cleared, neither side unscathed, it was clear that the torches of rage had not consumed the fragile flame of their alliance. The chief stood tall over the battered earth, voice raised above the distant cries. This war will rage, yes, but it will not break the bond we forged here, not while courage and compassion breathe. Dewan leaned on the chief's broad shoulder, eyes reflecting the sunrise, the first true dawn after long darkness. Maeve wiped dirt and sweat from her face, feeling a quiet strength settle deep within. The scars they carried were many, but now they bore a different meaning, one of unity, resilience, and the hope that even the harshest lands could grow new life. The camp awoke to a sky streaked with gold and rose, the barren earth softened by the promise of peace born from blood and sacrifice. And as the wind carried the chief's vow beyond the hills, across a landscape aching for healing, one truth echoed clearly. By dawn, everything had changed. The old rifts would not vanish overnight. There would be hard days ahead, and wounds to tend both seen and unseen. But now, a new path stretched before them, Not one of endless war, but of cautious trust and shared survival. Together, with every step taken in hope and honor, they would face whatever storms came next. For the first time in a long time, the frontier whispered not of enmity, but of beginnings.